We have a little bit of a different format today. We've got a number of shorter talks from environmental science undergrads as well as the graduate students today. So we're going to have Dr. John McLaughlin helping to curate his students first, and then we'll keep you out there. Okay, we're going to have you come up here at the end. Okay, perfect.
All right. Well, thank you. So this is culmination of Scholars Week. Scholars Week's been going on all week. There have been a number of events. Hopefully some got to partake of them. I've lamented that the College and the Environment has not participated formally as an organization. We've had a large number of people presenting. For example, like the Department of Anthropology has its own Scholars Week again. So this is our attempt at starting a tradition. And so hopefully next year, some of you will be up here presenting your work and give a glimpse of now of what you could do. So we're going to start with 4 presentations from those folks who have been hard at work in remote places, studying all kinds of things. And I'll give a brief introduction to each one. And then Colby can present his, and we'll have questions and answers, discussion. And then after that, we have a number of posters from people who presented posters in the campus-wide, university-wide student poster presentation. And so after the formal, traditional speaker series, oral presentations, we'll have our own mini poster session afterwards. I'm hoping that 20 of you will have your posters up next year. Okay, so that'll be just traditional poster presentation of the speakers. The poster authors can come up and stand by the posters and answer any questions or discussion about the posters in a traditional session. For now, then, let me start with the first group. They worked on, this is the list of them. Start with the first one. They studied the role and responses of fire, or wildfire, in a remote place. They, well, if you think about it, earlier this year, fire dominated our news coverage for several weeks as fires burn in the Los Angeles case. As the dry season approaches here, we can expect fire to similarly dominate our attention. And a lot of that is on the destructive effect of fire. But fire isn't entirely destructive. And what this group did was to study some of the benefits of fire and the positive responses and roles in systems. They looked at the role of fire in creating nest sites for many birds in the context of a wild and a very little studied place. They are exceptionally keen observers of birds. Not a single bird escapes their attention. And if you pay similar attention, you'll view wildfire differently, unless Michael Mendler already converted you into a wildfire advocate, EMT. You'll also never look at a dead tree the same, and you will see new life in every tree hole you see for the rest of your life. So with that, let's
As we rafted nearly 100 miles down the Ronde River, we kept noticing the same things sticking out. Cavity nesting birds, especially Lewis's woodpeckers, we were seeing them way more frequently in burnt areas than unburned ones. My name is Caleb Barville, and with my project collaborators, Luke Duvall and Celeste Jerome, we set out to look at how wildfire shapes bird habitat. Fire in the Hole isn't just a title. It's the spark that sets this whole ecosystem in motion. I want to begin with just telling you about why fire is important in these ecosystems. Fire has been around since Earth's oxygen level reached above 15%, about 420 million years ago. And since then, ecosystems have adapted with fire as part of how they work, how they function. Fire plays a crucial role in clearing understory and recycling nutrients from dead and decaying trees, as well as helping to promote biodiversity, creates new life, and helps a lot of different species come and thrive. And now many different species depend on wildfire affected areas for their survival. And fire helps to maintain these healthy and resilient ecosystems. But over the last 150 years or so, there's been an anti-fire regime in North America. Indigenous cultures have lost their cultural practices of burning, which played a crucial role in them for hunting and gathering and just overall cultivating the ecosystems that they lived and thrived in. In addition to that, practices such as salvage logging take away important wildfire-affected habitats from cavity nesting species. Now, I want to just give you a brief background on where we did our research. We're in northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington in the Snake River Basin, and we rafted along the Ronde River. It's an incredibly beautiful place and really unique because it's, for a lot of parts of it, are only accessible by water, by rafting, kayaking, that sort of thing. And it's also got this beautiful mosaic of different habitats, meaning it's a great place to do some research. And in 2021, the Elbow Creek fire burned through over 22,000 acres of land during the month of July, which opened up this incredible place to study the effects of fire. As you can see in the map here, surrounded in red, boundary in red, is the extent of the Elbow Creek fire. And then this long blue stretch is the section of the Ronde River that we rafted. And kind of the margins of that are our research area. And here's an image of the fire itself.
Sweet. So going into some background on cavity nesting birds, as the name implies, cavity nesting birds are birds that rely on cavities or holes in decaying, dead, or fire-scarred trees, along with some other objects for their nest sites. Cavity nesting birds are divided into two main groups, being primary nesters and secondary nesters. Primary nesters, which is mainly comprised of woodpeckers, are birds that both use cavities for their nest sites and are able to excavate those cavities on their own, while secondary nesters are birds that still use those cavities for nest sites, but are reliant on primary nesters to essentially excavate them excavate the nest sites for them. So you can kind of think of primary nesters as like contractors or home builders, and the secondary nesters as kind of tenants that need to move in. Cavity nesting birds make up 1/3 of all bird species, so they represent a large and diverse species or composition of birds. And they utilize a diverse number of habitats. For the purposes of our study, we divided the Ronde unique habitats into 4 groups, being deciduous dominant, mixed conifer dominant, the post-burn area, and ponderosa pine dominant. So we found the deciduous dominant, which is mainly riparian vegetation growing by the river. The furthest down the Ronde, we found the mixed conifer dominant at the very top of the river above the burn site. And then the burn site was below the mixed conifer, and the ponderosa pine was below the burn area.
So as we can see on our map here, we have the distribution of all of the cavity nesting species that we found along our rafting trip. So along the 92 miles, we took note of any visual or vocal observations and noted the river mile and the habitat group that they were located in. Now on our legend over to your right, you can see that the sparse densities are located in light blue and purples, whereas the higher densities are in our bright red and yellow. And what we found interesting shown here is that all of the higher densities are contained within the burn area. Now, not only was this interesting for the compilation of all of the species we tested, but as we began to investigate individual species, we found one of particular note, which was the Lewis's woodpecker. So once again, on this map format, you can see that all of their high densities were located explicitly within this burn area, which means that they are almost entirely dependent on this type of location to thrive. And furthermore,
Yeah, so why do we believe our research is significant? And we boiled it down to two main reasons. For one, it suggests that these post-burn areas and this burn habitat is essentially essential habitat for Lewis's woodpeckers, and they're obligates to that habitat. Secondly, we believe our research can inform the management of newly burned areas. So we found Lewis's woodpeckers to be almost entirely confined to these burned areas, so they're reliant on it. So preserving these burned habitats is essential to ensuring their population. So despite them having a broad range of pretty much all of Western North America, without these burned habitats, they won't have a place to live. And this is important, not only because they're pretty birds for bird watchers and they're fun to watch fly around, but because they are primary nesting birds, they create essential habitat for other birds and even some mammals. Secondly, we believe our research can help inform the management of newly burned areas. So there's a practice known as salvage logging, which is going in and harvesting burned timber freshly after a burn. And it stems from this idea that fire is a destructive force, and after it moves through, you should salvage what value is left. And essentially, our research shows that burned areas serve as ecological hotspots and are essential habitat for a ton of creatures, including the Lewis woodpeckers, which also creates more habitat for other birds. Going into our recommendations for future research, we recommend continuous surveys on the Grand Ronde of cavity nesting birds, very similar to what we have done. We would expect in the next 5 to 10 years that as the burned habitat continues to, I guess, develop and become more complex, you would see more secondary nesting birds move in. Right now, we only saw primary nesting birds, or largely only primary nesting birds, and that's likely due to a lack of developed vegetation. So 5 to 10 years from now, you would expect more cavities to open up for those birds and also vegetation for them to feed on. Additionally, we recommend a comparison of biodiversity in salvage logged and unsalvage logged areas. So essentially trying to quantify the actual effect of those detrimental practices. And then furthermore, we recommend surveys of actual cavity nest sites. So our research was only focused on the birds, but going out and actually finding the cavity nest sites in burned and unburned areas would essentially add a little depth to, I guess, the topic.
So in conclusion, these post-fire habitats provide irreplaceable support for key species such as the Lewis's woodpeckers. These burned areas create ideal sites for our cavity nesting birds. And as these birds create 1/3 of all of the species composition within this category, this means that these areas create the possibility for much higher biodiversity. Our findings heavily support how important it is to preserve these landscapes and should hopefully be taken into consideration for future Forest Service management.
We'd finally just like to acknowledge those who played a crucial role in making our project possible. First and foremost, John McLaughlin, thank you so much for your kind, humble contributions to our work, being our mentor, our instructor, our guide, and so much more. Truly wonderful. In addition, Greg Green, another professor here at Western, thank you for all of your intel on the region that we were going and doing research. Thank you for telling us how to correctly pronounce the names of different spots and telling us what birds we might see. Also, thank you, AJ Denton, for being another research collaborator. AJ is presenting in 30 minutes or 20 minutes, I guess, about bats. Really, really cool. And yeah, thank you all so much for hearing us. I really suggest doing field camp. It's an incredible experience.
All right, thank you. So next, we'll shift to the Elwha river ecosystem. And I don't think I need to tell this audience that environmental news is mostly news. It basically amounts to we're destroying life on the planet, and conditions are likely to get worse before they get better if we're lucky. Restoration associated with dam removal is different. Here we have a chance to make things better, to improve things comprehensively and rapidly. It's also a growth industry as most dams on this continent approach the end of their useful lives. that is a full employment program for everyone in this group. Well, we have a whole lot to learn about dam removal and restoration associated with it. Few dam removals have received much study. Even the dam removal that has received by far an order of magnitude more study than any others, the LWA, still has some major gaps. And this group is going to be addressing one of those gaps regarding amphibian responses to dam removals. And the results, I think you'll find, are highly encouraging.
Yeah, I'm DiChiara. This is Celeste, Jerome, Duvall, Ava Wetherell, Jack Gates, and Brooke Beaty. And as John was saying, we conducted our research on amphibian populations in the Mills Reservoir Restoration Site on the Elwha River in Olympic National Park here in Washington State. And we found a pretty incredible increase in species abundance and diversity relative to recent past benchmarks, suggesting that amphibian populations can and do rapidly rebound following dam removal and restoration. We're going to dive a little bit more into the background and context regarding our research and the site at which we conducted it, and then go right into our results and their implications for ecological restoration as a whole.
The Elwha River was dammed for 100 years prior to the removal of the Elwha Dam in 2011, and this was shortly followed by the Glines Canyon Dam removal in 2014. The Glines Canyon Dam removal is the largest and most comprehensively studied dam removal in all of history. And after this removal, what was previously known as Mills Reservoir was emptied out into a valley, and here restoration efforts have been ensuing ever since. This makes it an incredibly important environment to study in order to monitor how the system responds and inform future similar projects.
Sweet. So moving on to why we thought our research may be important and significant. For one, amphibians serve as a bioindicating species. So because they have certain sensitivities to changes in the environment, disturbance, and changes in environmental conditions, they can serve as a marker for ecosystem and wetland health. Amphibians play a vital role in pretty much any ecosystem they're found, especially when it comes to predator-prey relations. So as a secondary consumer, they both consume other organisms and are consumed by other organisms, serving to connect to different trophic levels. Additionally, because many amphibians breed in one area and then live the rest of their lives in another habitat, they serve as connecting species across habitats. As to why the area we conducted our research is important, so restoration from the Elwha is serving to inform current and future dam removals. So the research and surveys on the recovery of species is essentially laying out the framework for how we handle future dam removals. And then amphibian responses to dam removal has never been studied outside of the Elwha. I think the first study was done in 2018, and including ours, the total of 5. So the Elwha as a whole serves or offers a really unique opportunity to study something that'll be important moving forward and that there's many research gaps in.
Right, so leading into our questions, we really wanted to see what factors really contribute to influence amphibian breeding density and species richness, as well as how amphibians really respond to different hydrological conditions, which leads into our goals. Our main goal being how amphibians really respond, or how amphibian abundance really responds to the removal of the Elwha River dams, as well as the comparison of amphibian distributions and their habitat and amphibian distributions in different water quality conditions.
Yeah, so here's a look at the sites that we traveled to collect data in support of these questions. On the left, you can see the former Mills Reservoir site. It's outlined in red. On the right is Geyser Valley. Geyser Valley is about a couple miles upstream from the Mills Reservoir, and a floodplain system with the river frequently changing course at high flow and creating amphibian habitat, as can be seen in blue. We surveyed 15 sites in Geyser and 11 sites in the Mills Reservoir, collecting relevant data on amphibian abundance, diversity, and also information on ground cover through transects at each one.
So we found 4 different species of amphibians, including Pacific chorus frogs, western toads, red-legged frogs, and rough-skinned newts, which haven't been found in our study area of Mills previously. Through those observations, we also took note of many different variables as Jack explained, and through data analysis, we narrowed it down to a combination of.
Yeah, we found that a model containing these four variables of distance to mature forest, percent bare ground, and substrate type on said transect to mature forest, and pond area all provided the most reliable explanations for high or low amphibian densities within this section. So if we look at these graphs as individuals, we can see though that there's a high level of uncertainty within all of them. This is important because it means that these amphibians need a high level of complexity in their ecosystems in order to thrive, not just depending on individual factors, but the system as a whole working together. This also shows that future research should be done in order to A, better understand these patterns, and B, better understand these individuals and how to implement them in future ecological restoration.
Okay, so through our observations, we found an abundance of evidence pertaining to red-legged frog breeding, including tadpoles, egg masses, and red-legged frogs themselves. Interesting that we found evidence of breeding in mills because previous research groups looking into amphibians haven't found that. The fact that red-legged frogs were still there months after their breeding season is suggesting that vegetation in the area has improved because previously they would have had to crawl through a barren landscape of sorts to get to the breeding sites, but now, and then they would have to go back to the forest where they lived most of the year, but now you don't.
Restoration in Mills Valley has advanced greatly only 10 years after dam removal. This is shown in particular by this recent establishment of red-legged frogs. As Ava said, in years prior to the study, they were found in much lower numbers and were not found breeding. But now as the floodplain has developed more, they are using it not only for breeding, but also for long after the breeding season has ended. So the valley has matured enough to not just function as their aquatic breeding habitat, but also as their terrestrial non-breeding habitat. And these recent changes in amphibian presence in the valley are likely because the valley is becoming more complex as succession proceeds and as restoration occurs post dam removal. Because as restoration occurs, there's revegetation and establishment of beaver ponds, and the whole valley becomes further in succession. And as our findings show, amphibians prefer this complex habitat. Like Celeste was saying, there's a complexity of different habitat variables that contribute to what their ideal breeding habitat is. This is likely why we saw this increase in abundance and diversity in the valley. And these findings are really exciting because only 10 years after the Lions Canyon dam removal, there's numerous species of amphibians that have returned and are using this valley for breeding. They've established themselves there. And there's been a similar response to the Elwha dam removal by fish. A lot of attention has been given to the rapid response of salmon to the dam removal, and amphibians are doing the same thing. They have a very positive response to dam removal and are responding rapidly to these restoration efforts. So with an increasing amount of dam removal on the horizon, more attention should be given to amphibians. More research should be done to further understand the response to dam removal, and they should be more considered as a very positive and effective and quick benefit of dam removal.
And of course, here are acknowledgements, especially I want to quickly thank John McLaughlin, our mentor, for giving us this opportunity to present all of these findings for you. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, moving along, we're gonna move along because we're gonna run out of time. Imagine studying animals that fly in the dark. Can't see them for the most part. They don't leave in really many signs or tracks, and so you can't rely on that. Even sound is not reliable because almost all their vocalizations are in the ultrasonic range beyond human hearing. And so consequently, we don't know a lot that's really important about bats. And much of what we do know is wrong. Bats' reputations are maligned by misinformation, by superstitions and all kinds of other things that this group will get into a little bit. And so there's a great need to learn more about them. In the study areas that AJ and Gracie were studying, there have been no prior surveys or study of bats at all. And so they walked into what we could call a scientific void. And doing so and making sense of that took an extraordinary amount of dedication and courage. If you pay attention, their discoveries will enrich your night.
Thank you, John, for that very kind introduction. I'm Gracie.
AJ Denton, and we're affectionately known as the Batwoman in our crew. So like John said, there's a large knowledge gap, and we did some bat inventories in order to help fill it a little bit. Dropping a bucket here, but bats are pretty poorly understood, but they're very vulnerable to destruction, their habitat, and a fungus called white nose syndrome, among other things, of course. But this makes some really good indicators of environmental change in the area.
So we evaluated species-specific responses to time and habitat, and our results helped develop a missing bat baseline in the neighborhood and inform future restoration and conservation work. In the Elwha bat inventory provides valuable insight into the role of Geyser Valley as a restoration model. And for the Grand Ronde, it supports an evaluation of the effects of sand restoration on the Snake River Basin, several trophic levels above the influx of nutrients. So meet our team. These are our lovely bats. Go on. And these guys, John McLaughlin, who does not need an introduction, but we are so, so grateful to him. And Greg Green, who is an incredible mentor, professor. He has done so much for us, giving us his time, knowledge, and equipment to outline for our presentation.
We're gonna skip that.
So some facts about bats. They are the only mammals capable of true flight, and there are over 1,400 species. Currently, 92 are endangered, and an additional 120 are listed as vulnerable. They are on all continents, including Antarctica, and they make up 20% of the mammalian species.
So they're super diverse. So their feeding habits also super diverse. This feeding habits a lot of times helps cement them as keystone species. The insectivores, they help agriculture in the U.S. Save them $3.7 to $53 billion a year. They really like those insects, and then they pollinate and drop seeds after they eat the fruits. So help seed the place. They live 20 to 40 years, but only have 1 to 2 pups a year. So rebounding from any drop in their population size is kind of hard sometimes. Some myths real quick. Bats are blind. They're not. They have really good eyesight, better than ours. They are not flying rodents. They are mammals, like we said. They attack humans and spread rabies at a rapid rate. There's only one species that sucks blood from mammals, and they rather like livestock more than humans, and only 1% of all bat species have rabies. So likelihood drops pretty far on that. A true myth, though, is they help produce tequila because they're the #1 pollinator of agave. So
You care about margaritas, care about bats. So quickly, white nose syndrome is one of the reasons why establishing a baseline is so important. It is a very rapid and deadly disease that reached the United States in 2006 and since has killed 6.7 million bats, with some colonies experiencing 99% mortality rates, and there is no cure as of yet.
Quick thing on methods, just because it's really cool. This little thing right here is our ultrasonic microphone, and it captures all the things we cannot hear. And it goes into this tablet with the Sonobat equipment that can separate out the species by their frequencies. So really fun. And
So this is just something fun for you guys. This is what we see on our screen. And this is a canyon bat. It weighs less than a penny, 4 grams. and it makes a really cute little bubble noise. So we have a sound clip. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that the microphone would also pick us up. So hopefully you can enjoy our excitement as well as that.
We could see them at that point. So our study sites, everybody kind of went over those already. We did 6 areas at the Elwha, and then 4 on the Grand Ronde and 1 on the Waialoa. Or I said that wrong, sorry. Anyways, and these areas, like John said, have not been studied for bats. There was one in the lower Loa Elwha, but no overlapping. So the Elwha has 4 bat species that we detected. There was, oh my gosh, 70 bat calls. Only 35 of those were identified by species. So the low number, we suspect it was too early in the season and it had not enough insects, impossible, too cold for bats to be out or haven't migrated in yet.
So this is our total confirmed IDs. You can see species on the bottom and number of passes up top. So for this one, we did 6 habitats, but because of the lack of confirmed IDs or material, we showed these 2 because this is where we had the highest density and confirmed IDs. But if you have any questions about our other stuff, of course, we can talk more later. It is interesting to note that on the last night, we did an open canopy wetland where we got 22 human myotis bats, but unfortunately our devices died at 9:12. So you will see a clump of on the next slide.
Okay, so these aren't quite as impressive on this river, but what we have here is temporal and physical like representation. So on this side, we have the times we took it, and then their species are right here, and then habitat, and then the circles over here is species or habitat and species. So you can see on the open canopy wetland, there's a lot of Yuma myotis there. Same kind of over here for the Yuma, it's all in that habitat. But on the next river, it's cooler. Speaking of Grand Ronde, we had 9 confirmed species and 433 bat calls were identified, 804 total. So a lot more, and we were super excited. That's where that clip came from. Yeah.
So in these graphs, as you can see, the Lana, which is the silverhead bat, is very dense. So I ended up removing them so you can see the other species number of passes more clearly. And you'll see that in some of the other graphs as well. So for the dense forest, same kind of thing. Lana was very, very present. And then not as much for the other ones, as well as sparse forest on the next slide. And then something interesting to note is the TABR here, which is the Brazilian and Mexican free-tailed bat. We were kind of surprised to see that there because as of now, their most northern region is about 100 miles north of California. So it's kind of interesting to see that they're migrating upwards. And in the burned area, some future research that could be done is we got the most diversity here. We don't really know what that means in terms of fire regime for bats, but it was also the only spot that we saw the big brown bat, the color in red. And then for basalt cliffs and the shrub steppe, the silver hairs were actually less than the other ones, so I kept them in. But for the canyon bat, the one that you listened to, that was the one in yellow, and they were only there because they prefer the cliffs and the deserty areas. So.
Okay, so looking at this is a lot cooler on this river. If you look at the Llano, which is the silver hair, they were kind of everywhere. You can see they have a bunch of different colored dots, which represents all of the different habitats. But what's interesting is right here, you see that the dense forests, they come out in large numbers in the beginning and kind of don't really show up much after that, possibly suggesting in this habitat that they're getting what they need right away and not needing to be out there for very long. And then if you look up here at the canyon beds, they only had the shrub step and the clipped canyon areas available to them at the moment. Similarly, if you look over here, the burn areas have a bunch of different diversity. Moving along, I guess.
So for time constraints, I'm gonna keep our statistics kind of short, but feel free to ask questions later. We concluded that bats are feeding at different times, showing temporal partitioning. Additionally, we found that species do show habitat preference, some more than others, some less than others. But yeah, that was our result, and bats are all.
All right, the last presentation is gonna have to be really brief, and the theme of that. Our university is responding to reductions in funding, leading to painful decisions, including as if the university lost 90%. It ceased to function as a university as we know it. But that's the situation for salmon in the Snake River Basin and all of the creatures who depend upon salmon, including human. The impacts of decreased depleted salmon populations cascade throughout the region, causing existential impacts to indigenous peoples and the entire energy and nutrient supply for the ecosystem. This group studied impacts of those on kingfishers, a very charismatic and conspicuous species. And their results will provide a baseline from which we can evaluate increased, hopefully restoration. For this group, I'm not going to cut their time by 90%, but if we can cut it by 50%, yeah, it would really help. Okay.
Yeah, we'll go quick.
Right. Okay, we're gonna speed run it. We conducted our research on belted kingfishers in the Snake River Basin, and that included, like everyone was saying, the Wallowa and Lower Grand Ronde River. We found that kingfishers are indicators of higher trophic influences of salmon populations, and therefore the massive reductions in historic fish populations can be shown with kingfisher population. That's our outline.
Yeah, so what are kingfishers and why should we study them? The belted kingfisher is one of 3 species in the contiguous United States and it's most widely distributed. They're a river bird, feeding by perching on shrubs or trees and diving into the water for small fish, historically primarily salmon smolt. They're noted as being highly territorial, with both individuals and mating pairs aggressively defending a defined territory. They nest in earthen banks in holes that they excavate, as seen in the picture on the right. And due to their diet of 80 to 90% fish, improving our understanding of kingfishers will improve our knowledge of how the effects of anthropogenic factors such as dams cascade throughout the food chain and affect higher trophic levels in riparian ecosystems.
All right, to give some context, as many of you know about the Snake River dams, and that they're not isolated from our waterways in Whatcom County. Since the dams have been built in 1956 to 1975, there's been many legal battles between tribes, government, kind of the old story of many broken promises. Currently, there is an agreement with Washington and Oregon State, as well as the tribes of the basin, on a Columbia Basin Restoration Initiative, and this one is outlined to restore salmon populations and provide alternatives to energy sources other than the dams, as well as to invest more money on research for dams in total.
And so why this is important and why we give you this legal history is because it affects salmon populations. And so the left, either one, you guys can look at either. The left graph shows the tribal fish consumption of tribes along this basin. And the very top shows prior to contact, the mid 1800s, and the current harvest. And you can see that before the dams were put in, salmon populations were declining already, but there was a immense decline after the dams were put in during, I mean, they were put in about the 1950s. So, and the right is more of a, like, this is the Chinook, salmon abundance all along like different reaches of the Grand Ronde River. And you can see in white, that is their historic numbers, and the black graphs show, or bars show a major decline. And so this is important because kingfishers rely heavily on smolt, as Jack said, for their diet. And so if we see a decline in salmon, we're gonna see major declines in kingfishers.
Yeah, some of the goals that we've been talking about, we wanted to determine the effects on dams on kingfisher abundances. And then we're also wanted to do an internal comparison of just kingfisher behavior. And we did that by determining relative importance of suitable nesting and foraging habitat.
Yeah, so here's a look at the study site in which we collected our data in. The lower Grand, or the lower Wallowa and the Grand Ronde River can be seen in blue. As mentioned, the Grand Ronde is a major tributary of the Snake and is located upstream of the lower 4 dams. The fire mentioned by a previous group can be seen outlined in red cross hatching, which further adds to the spatial complexity and ecological value of the area. It's a complex and diverse riparian corridor ranging from a mixed conifer ecosystem in the upper reaches down to a more grassland kind of shrub steppe ecosystem in the lower reaches. In the red points, you can see places where we detected kingfishers. There were 50 detections overall, and as you can see, they're distributed throughout the reach of the study site.
All right, so initially we anticipated that based on these bank characteristics in the green, the vegetation, that the belted kingfisher abundance would be different. However, as you can see with that threshold, it doesn't really differ at all. But also important to point out in the blue are water characteristics, but all in all, belted kingfishers are aquatic avian species. They like water. Moving on to the graph on the left, the perch height we found between low, medium, high. Belted kingfishers prefer high perches. And then for nesting habitat, we found that belted kingfishers are not limited to their nesting habitats. So between all of this data, there's got to be something else that affects the abundance of kingfishers.
Yeah, so here's a visual representation of what Brooke just spoke about. This is a section of
1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, we can skip that.
Visual representation.
And so we also looked at their density. And so this is the kingfishers per kilometer along the river, which was shown on the, and so I guess our key findings, we can skip to it.
Yeah, there's less kingfishers on the
Yeah.
Grand Ronde than
Compared to other comparable Pacific Northwest rivers that are mainly undammed. Okay, and so I guess the key insights of this presentation, the key insight of this presentation is salmon policies ascend the food chain. Kingfisher densities on the Grand Ronde are lower than others. This is just a baseline for kingfisher responses and their densities on the Grand Ronde. And also the kingfishers are limited first by food and then next or not suitable nesting habitat. And so for future studies, we think it'd be important to compare kingfisher densities on dam versus undammed rivers, and also research kingfisher abundances following dam removal.
Thank you.
While holding before this presentation, I want to make a correction. I was informed there is no double-digit tuition increase. I'm still in the backcountry somewhere and trying to catch up on things. So please know that I don't know what the tuition increase is. Ignore that comment and pay attention to what Colby has to say. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colby Rand. I'm a master's student in the environmental science program, working with Dr. Alia Khan in the Chronospheric Research Group. So my research is on satellite and UAV remote sensing of snow algae. So snow algae, they are microscopic photosynthetic organisms that live on snow surfaces all over the world. You can find them on the slopes of Mount Baker, all throughout the Cascades and even along the coast of the Antarctic Peninsula. So snow algae are important because they darken snow surfaces, therefore reducing albedo. So albedo is a measure of the percentage of incoming solar radiation that gets reflected by a surface. And so this decrease in snow albedo increases snow melt because the snow is then absorbing more solar radiation. And increased snow melt then facilitates increased algal growth because snow algae require liquid water in order to grow. And increased algae concentrations then decrease albedo even further, and the cycle intensifies, forming what we call the bioalbedo feedback loop. And so my research focuses on the remote sensing of snow algae using multispectral satellite and UAV or uncrewed aerial vehicle imagery. And so my methods utilize the unique spectral profiles of both red and green snow algae in order to map their locations in this imagery. And so this refers to the reflectance at various wavelengths along the electromagnetic spectrum. And then the imagery is called multispectral because it contains several bands that record the reflectance at several intervals along this spectrum. And so my satellite imagery that I'm working with is sourced from a variety of different sensors, each with their own unique advantages and disadvantages. And so SkySat, for example, is a constellation of small satellites that has a very high spatial resolution, just 50 centimeters per pixel. And so this enables it to record and monitor features at a very fine scale, such as the Mazama glacier algae bloom up here in the top center. And so this algae bloom, this occurs every year on the Mazama glacier in Mount Baker, and it's able to be detected via SkySat satellites. Another satellite system that we work with is Sentinel-2, operated by the European Space Agency. And so this has a lower spatial resolution, but it's able to record the presence of algae and dirty snow across the entirety of Mount Baker, as shown here in the bottom right. We've also used satellite imagery to map snow algae at a lot of locations along the Antarctic Peninsula, including Peterman Island, as shown here in the bottom center. So in addition to my satellite imagery, I also have flown a drone and recorded UAV imagery at multiple locations along the Antarctic Peninsula over the past couple of years. You can see the locations here. And the main benefit of the UAV imagery is that it's able to record imagery at a much higher spatial and spectral resolution. And this is because drones are able to be flown at a much lower altitude than satellites, and they can be equipped with a variety of different sensors depending on what it is that we're looking to study. Yeah, so I'll just leave you here with this video of the drone flying. Thank you.
Okay, folks, and since we've had a packed schedule of talks, I'd encourage you to actually just come forward and chat with presenters, look at the posters, and we can handle questions on that basis today. Thanks, everybody.
Yay.
All right.